We've been getting a lot of numbers thrown at us over the past 8 months, more than 247,000 COVID deaths, 11.2 million plus cases, record daily case rates, hospitalizations, positivity percentages, rates of transmission, not to mention unemployment numbers, business closures, remote schooling rates. The list goes on and on. And while all of those help tell the story of where we stand in this pandemic, they don't tell the real story about the people affected. No one has been untouched by this outbreak, as we're constantly reminded, even just by stopping a few people on the street.
I'm out of work myself right now. I'm dying to go back to work. I was locked up in the summertime. Now I have to be locked up in the winter.
Work. I work for elderlies, and all I do is work. They don't have family. We come in, we take care of them.
I work with people who are nonverbal. It's very frustrating, because I see them and, they look like they want to go somewhere, do things. It's like they're being imprisoned, because they can't get out.
I have 3 kids, one of whom isn't going to college because of the pandemic. I have another one who's in remote school, and she struggles along, and we're all at the end of our ropes collectively.
A lot of people feel that way because these are very real sacrifices people are making, not just for their own health, but for the health of their families, their neighbors, their community at large. I'm joined now by 2 people who know that well. Karen Nassen is a COVID-19 survivor who lost her husband and father-in-law to the virus early on in the pandemic. She's also the general manager of the North Shore Music Theater, where the entire staff was laid off. Alex Goldstein is a political strategist and creator of the Faces of COVID Twitter account, which he started back in March and features the stories of some of the many people who've died in the pandemic. Most importantly, though, how they lived, like 78-year-old James Adams of Cascade, Montana, a school bus driver who his family said lifted us up with encouragement and wisdom and taught us how to live with love, respect, and honor. 37-year-old Carla Val of San Antonio, who her family said was so full of life and that she loved to fish, take trips to the coast, and hang out with family and friends. And Kiara McDade, a 25-year-old from Chicago, who was a newlywed, a new mom-to-be, and a youth mentor, and whose family described her as having an unusually generous spirit and a smile that made our hardest times light. Joining me now are Karen and Alex. Good to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
So, Karen, your story is unbelievable. In March, early on, you and your husband, you drive your husbands, Stephen and Richard, I think on St. Patrick's Day, neither of you are feeling terribly well, to the hospital. What happens when you get there?
First of all, we had to be called ahead in advance because you couldn't just show up because there were so many people. The hospital was inundated. So they said, just pull up to the emergency bay and wait for us. And they came out and they took Stephen pretty quickly because he was so gravely ill. And then I waited in the car for 3 or 4 hours to go in myself.
What did Stephen say to you as he left, Karen?
Thank God somebody told me this story months after because I didn't remember it at the time because I was so delirious from oxygen deprivation. But when my sister went to pick up our belongings at the hospital, a PA had stopped her and said, I had to relay this story to you. I was the person who took your brother-in-law out of the car that day, and it was the most beautiful thing I witnessed. He turned around and he looked at his wife and he said, I love you, and he blew her a kiss and he walked away. And after the fact, I remembered it. And I remember looking at him like a schoolgirl and saying, I love you too. It touched my heart. And that was the last time I saw him.
So you ended up in a medically induced coma for 31 days. And when you came out of your coma, that's when you learned the news about your husband, and not just your husband, correct?
Correct. My husband, my father-in-law, and a dear friend of mine. My sister had to run me through a series of questions first to make sure that I was retaining information. And she said, I'm not going to tell my sister twice that her husband is dead. So she said to me, KK, I'm never going to lie to you. Stephen didn't make it. And I said, I know, because he was with me the whole time. When I was in the medically induced coma, I had horrific hallucinations, and he was always there, just smiling at me with a glow around him.
Karen, how are you now?
I'm doing pretty well. I woke up from the coma without even a sore throat. So I thought I was pretty lucky at the time, even though, I couldn't walk or anything. I had to learn how to re-walk. But I'm just now learning that I have some long-term, I didn't think I was a long hauler, as they call it, but I do think I am now. I'm starting to have some pulmonary issues and cardiac issues that were picked up on. So now, I'm going to wear a monitor for 2 weeks to see what's going on. There's been some residual muscle damage that a lot of people didn't know was happening. Like when we were in PT, they were working us hard. And it was 3 or 4 months that I couldn't use my arms as a result.
Alex, you've done a fabulous thing, and to say you have filled a huge hole, tell us about the genesis of Faces of COVID. What were you hoping to do?
First of all, I just want to say, Karen, my heart is in my throat. This project that Jim's talking about, I did it for folks like you, to just affirm the basic dignity of the people that we've lost. I feel like this moment is just so isolating, and so many of the families that I've talked to who have asked for folks to be shared on this platform, which is now up to about 125,000 followers, are just, they've been having to mourn this within the four walls of their house, and to have the opportunity to just have a moment, a flash of a moment where people across the country can acknowledge that something really horrible has happened to their loved one and that someone's missing from this world. I think that was really the primary motivation, but it's also for me about accountability, because I think every single one of these stories that we've posted 3,500 stories so far, are asking us the question about whether our government could have done more to protect them, whether we as members of community could have done more to protect each other. And I think every single time I see one of these stories that we post, that's what I think. That's what goes through my mind. So it is about accountability too.
I want to return to that in a second, but I have to say, Alex, I have the exact same reaction to your Twitter account, Faces of COVID, that I did when the New York Times did those little profiles on all the people who died. Because as I said, I often have people on the show who lost someone they loved, usually often to violence. This is a kind of violence too. And, we all know how they died. We almost never know how they lived. And just like the New York Times did after 9/11, you've done a beautiful thing. I'm almost afraid to ask. I'm hoping the response, Alex, has been all positive and none of this toxic crap that is infecting this country. Is that the way it
Jim,
is, I hope?
I've experienced throughout my life working in politics how toxic social media can get. For whatever reason, we have carved out the sacred little space of social media where people are nothing but kind and compassionate to each other. And so far, the trolls have stayed away, and I really hope it stays that way. So,
Alex, one other thing, you've also been personally affected by this vis-a-vis your father. Tell us briefly, if you can, what that's about.
Yeah, I think that, my experience is emblematic of what a lot of folks are going through, and sort of picked up on it on some of those vignettes from the beginning, which is, my father has stage 4 prostate cancer, and, these very well may be some of his last months, and to not be able to have been able to hug him for the last, many months since March, is hard. And also the hardest thing for me is not being able to sit with him for his chemo. Dana-Farber changed the rules, understandably, to keep extra people out. And so now I literally drop him off at the curb. And that has been, those are the little types of things. It's not nearly to the extent of what Karen has gone through, which is like still my heart's beating faster for having heard that story. But it's the little ways that this is kind of, ripping holes in all of us right now, I think.
Karen, as I said, thousands of stories of how people lived have been told by Alex on his Twitter account. Take a second and tell us about Stephen and how he lived his life.
He was probably one of the kindest souls I've ever met in my lifetime. I mean, he was always doing for other people. I think he would be stunned to hear the outpouring of love and support for him and his foundation that's been formed. His dad was a World War II veteran that saw action. He went down on the Vincennes in shark-infested waters in World War II during the Battle of the Guadalcanal. We had just celebrated his 99th birthday. Stephen would have been 59 in April. He actually, the day that I woke up was on his birthday. It was like a gift that he had sent me back. It was just incredible. But he was a very talented photographer. And so we have a beautiful life body of work of his that he left behind.
I'm so glad to hear that. Karen, we wish you good health in the future. Thanks for sharing your story. And Alex, thank you for sharing so many. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you both. For more on Karen's story, head to GoFundMe.com and search Karen Nassen Benny. You can also find Faces of COVID online at Twitter.com/Faces of COVID.